Thanks for joining me. This lab session is entitled JMeter Script Execution Lab. I want to go back to the Google website, but with some additional sites that I put together some time ago to test some JMeter features. I believe it will be a good exercise. What I want to do is launch the script, review it, then talk about terms of scenarios, and also talk about scripts regarding reporting and analysis. So let's get on with it. Each time we get into a lab session, it's my hope that I will open more elements and talk about them in more detail so that you keep getting more and more knowledge about JMeter and how it operates and how each of its elements are of value to you. So hopefully that comes out each time. Here's the script that I mentioned earlier. What I intend to do is talk to you about it, present it, and then get into a little bit more detail about the scenarios and what could be done with it in terms of testing, as well as reporting and a little bit on analysis. As my approach is, we will talk more and more about scenarios and test results, and then how to analyze that information. Right now, let's just take a look at this particular script in more detail. So here is what I call test common sites. If I click on that, that is the thread group. And so inside the thread group, we have several elements. We want to talk about these first two elements, or transaction elements, and they break down into further elements. If I open this one as well, and you can see that based on the titles, these are HTTP requests. Click on that first one, you can see it, HTTP requests, and I've given them names. One to do Google search, one to do YouTube, and one for Google Mail. Then in the other transaction, I have Amazon, Home Depot, and eBay. Now, I want to talk about these two transactions. There's something you haven't seen before. It's called the transaction controller. I gave it a name, Transaction Google and Transaction Stores, just to give them something different. What they do, unlike the simple controller, they actually not only group requests together, but they actually tabulate or calculate response information on a summary level so that you can see that in some of the output reports. And we'll go into that in a little more detail. Also, if you look at this first checkbox, it says generate parent sample. If I have that particular selection checked, then what happens is this transaction summary that appears in the report is the summary only, and all of the detail requests are not shown. So they're just bubbled up into one single summary piece of information. I'll show you the differences there. And sometimes you want that to occur, and other times you don't. Now, let's look at what we have in terms of reports. You're familiar with the view results tree. That hasn't changed. It's still the same. Now, of course, all of these, if I highlight, all of these are report outputs, or what we call in JMeter listeners, and each one has its own flavor of reporting. So I'd like to mention a little bit of that. Now, of course, I should have mentioned, this is separate. This is not a report. Let me just move this up one more so it's not with the reports. The response assertion, this one is supporting the transaction store group. Well, actually, it's supporting more than that. I'm sorry. If I click on this to collapse, you'll notice that all of that is within this test common suite or sites. If I expand that, I see these items. So all of these items are a part of this thread group. They're inside the thread group. I could take response assertion and put it inside of one of these two groups, and it would only do processing for that. But this one is designed to process both of these transactions, and that means everything, all of these requests inside. So for each of these requests, as they are processed, this response assertion gets processed as well to check and see if it's getting a status code or return code of 200. If it does, you never hear anything from it. If it doesn't, then it will stop the process because it failed to get a 200 status code on each of these requests. Hopefully you followed that. Now, let's talk about the reports. So the reports are these four. The first one, as I said, view results tree. You've seen that before, so you're familiar with that one. And we'll see some output on that. Then the summary report is a little different. You did not see that before, but it's going to break down by request and give us information that has to do with responses as well as throughput data. Then the aggregate report, that one does a similar thing. We'll see the differences. And then the view results in table also gives us similar information, but yet also some that is not similar, dissimilar information. Okay, this last thing has to do with reporting. I don't want to get into that much at this point, but this is one that I used for getting offline information. It actually accumulates data and sends it to what's called a background or back-end listener for further reporting in a different tool. Okay, go back one more time to the thread group. So as I said, we've got two transaction groups underneath the thread group, inside the thread group, if you will, and those will be processed by group. Each item will be processed in the sequence that they are shown. So let's give that a try and see what that output looks like. So we're looking at view results tree. I'm going to expand that one more time so we can compare that. Let's see what happens when we run this test. Let's save in case I changed anything and run this test. Well, before I do that, double check. We only have one thread, one loop. Okay, go back to view results. And because we have this file mentioned here to output the results from view results tree, I have an option to either append to the existing file don't start this test, or overwrite. I'm going to do that. Now, what happened? We see Google search, that was the first one, YouTube, mail, Amazon, Home Depot, eBay. They all processed. This is like running a test to check the status of different sites. So that's all this is at this point. We're just checking the status. Did it run? Did it respond or not? And it did. All of them responded successfully. Two additional things we see in the list is transaction Google, which is this statement, and transaction stores. So these are the transaction controllers, and they output information as well. So we got a response from it. They're collecting data. In this case, the transaction Google is collecting data for these first three requests, and transaction stores is collecting data for these last three requests. And the information then is reported. So we get a load time for the first three of really 1 second. That's 1287 milliseconds. So 1 second, or 1.2 seconds. Connect time of 59, connecting to the server. And we have a latency of 240. That's not bad. That's okay. It tells us how much total bytes were passed and how much was sent. So this is the return, and this is how much was sent. I didn't intend to go into too much detail here, but I just wanted to give you an example that you do get some information here. We're going to see some other information in the other reports. And let's do that now. Let's go to the summary report and see what is there. If I expand this, as I mentioned, there's a checkbox on the transaction controller elements that I could have checked, and if I checked it, then all I would see would be transaction Google and transaction stores. Each of these detail requests I would no longer see. So because these are the summary for the three above in both cases, then that's all I would see is just the summary information. And sometimes that's all you want to report. What is the average? Now the average here, of course, is a summary. So you have to keep that in mind. If they're going after different sites, maybe that's not what you want. But if it's all requests at the same site, then that might have a little bit more meaning. So in this case, the transaction Google or the transaction stores, that might not have as much weight as the individual request response times. So here we see Google search, it took just over not even a second to respond. We're talking milliseconds to respond, like maybe roughly 1/10 of a second. Where YouTube, to access it almost took a second to get a response out of YouTube. May have a lot to do with the traffic going on at this particular time of the day. Looking at Amazon, Home Depot, and eBay in comparison, notice a 1/2 second for eBay access. The others, not so much. So, could indicate that there's a significant amount of traffic on the eBay site in comparison to Amazon and Home Depot, even though Amazon comes in a second to these three. hopefully you got some information there. Now, there are different columns. We're talking about the minimum amount of time. Now, notice that they're the same, and that's because we only have one sample of each of them. When we run, I'm going to run again with, say, 3 samples, and we'll see what the average minimum max is. They will probably be different, and there were no errors, no standard deviation, and throughput of data is an interesting thing. We see more data throughput for the Google search, which is a good thing. And we see in this section, we see more for Home Depot, which might not be good. Maybe it's passing too much information, or it's suggesting that the server is responding quicker than the other two. And that's what I would say is we have better server response with the Google search and the Home Depot. We see the amount of data being passed in kilobytes, how much sent, how much received. So the sent came from the client, the received came from the server or servers. Okay. Let's look at the aggregate. It's going to be similar. Will we see anything different? Yes, we will see median, 90 percentile, 95 percentile, and 99 percentile. There again, we'll see pretty much the same information because we only have one request. Then view results in table. Now we see some different information here. For each of the samples, we see a timestamp, and we see, oh yeah, of course, we see the thread name. Then we see, of course, status, the time, again, what we've seen before, and the bytes, and connect time. So we see latency and connect time. Those can be useful in analysis. Okay. All right, let's now try to run this again. I'm going to go back and point to the view results tree. I'm going to go up here and clear the output. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to change the thread group to loop 3 times. Save. Go back to view results and run. Overwrite. And we're done. Notice we have Google search, YouTube, mail, transaction, Amazon, Home Depot, eBay, and then it starts all over again. Google search, and then it starts again. Google search. So it runs in this sequence. We're going to see something different in a few minutes. Let's look at the report again. Summary report. We now see 3 samples of each. And we now see the average was 110 for Google search, but we did get one that ran as fast as 106 milliseconds, and we see one that ran longest, 117. So since there were 3, these are the 3 that we're seeing. One was at 117 milliseconds, one at 106, the other one at 110. The standard deviation, we now see something that lets us know the larger the standard deviation, the more differences there are between the average, minimum, and max. We still see no errors occurring. That's good. We see that the throughput is now in minutes rather than seconds. So it's saying that 33.2 kilobytes of data per minute. That's rather slow. And what else do I want to tell you about? No, that's fine. Good there. On the aggregate report, again, we see the 3 samples. Now we see the 90%, 95%, and median. I'm sorry, not median. 99% plus the median over here. With the median, we see that 107 is considered the median between 110 and 117, or 107, 110, and 117. The median was 107. Whereas for all of the percentiles, we see 117, which was the largest. What else do I want to show you? Anything else? Let's look at view results in table. We get the bytes, how much data is going back and forth, and again, the latency and connect time. So these can be good pieces of information for analysis to determine, do we have too much information being sent back and forth? Is there something that can be done there to improve that if the times are bad? Same thing with latency. Usually a network engineer and their staff, they're normally on top of this, constantly monitoring to determine if there are any tuning they can do, excuse me. So when we're involved as a performance tester, all we really can do is check with them to see that they have looked at anything lately. Now, we can also look at this from the standpoint of, if I have a large amount of data going across the network, then chances are the number of packets are high to get that information, because the packets are only 1,500 bytes a piece. And so I have to look at this from a performance engineer standpoint and say, okay, as long as the latency is low, never showing any high points, then I should be okay with the amount of packets that have to go across to send or receive the data. Connect time is another one, having to do with the server connect time. How long does it take? You don't want to see seconds in this column. Okay, I think that's enough. Let's now take a look. I want to run with more than one thread group so you can see how that operates. So let's duplicate this. No. Well, yeah, I'm going to do the duplicate. Now, what happens with the duplicate, you see test common sites and you see test common sites. So I have 2 of them. It takes everything underneath it and recreates it. So if I expand on this, what do I see? I see even the reporting. So I could create a different name. Let's just change this one to Site 2. And now I have the exact request in both of these groups. And I can now change one of the groups to be different from the other and run a test where it will run 2 scenarios. That's what I'm actually doing here, is defining 2 different scenarios. Another thing I can do is I can say, well, I really want common sites to be Google and the other to be stores. So I want requests from the Google transaction to run in test common sites, and in test common sites 2, I want the transaction stores to run. Let's do that. So here I will take and right click and remove. So now I only have the one. Then in Common Sites 2, I want to remove Google. Right click and remove. The result is we have one thread group that has Google requests, and the other thread group has transaction or stores requests. Okay, now notice I also have the reporting and response assertion. I'll leave the response assertion that way. If I needed to use it, have it do some other assertion, then I'd have one in each one. I can do it, but I'm going to leave them the same. I'm not interested in changing that. It's just checking for the status code on them. But the view results, let's say I want all of that in one report. For that matter, I could say, I could leave everything this way, then I'm going to see separate reports for each thread group. If I don't want to see that, then I could take these, highlight them, and then drag this all the way to the top, right above the first thread group. See the line? Now I'm going to let go of my left click, and now I've moved a set of them up above. And what that does is request reports for both common sites and common sites 2. So that means I could take this set and remove them completely. I'm going to remove. Now what we have, the reporting is going to occur for both of the thread groups. Hopefully you see that. And the response assertion is going to be applied to what's in the thread group that it's a part of. So this one is a part of the first thread group, and this one is a part of the second thread group. So we have a distinction there. Okay, so now we're ready to test again, but I want to change site 2 from being 3 loop back to 1, change the ramp up time to 20, and change the user thread to 3. So we will have 3 users that will ramp up in 20 seconds and run one time. In the first thread group, we're running 1 user thread, and we're going to run it 3 times in sequence. So let's see what kind of results we get. Save, clear, and point to view results and run. Overwrite. Notice now, Google search, Amazon. Google search, Amazon. Home Depot. YouTube. So they're not running in the normal sequence, but both thread groups are being applied in the test, but not in sequential mode. This time it's more random. And that might be what you're looking for. You have to decide what you need in your test. Okay, so we have it completed. And let's take a look at report results. In the summary report, you'll notice there's nothing. In the aggregate report, nothing. But in the view results in table, there is something. So for some reason, it did not process the first 2 reports, summary report and aggregate report. I'm going to try something a little different there. But we see the Google search, Amazon. So this particular report lets you see the actual sequence just like you saw in the view results tree. And you can then see what the average response time. Notice that with the Google search, that's good. We saw 107 before, and the average is still 107, where some of the others, let's see, YouTube, we've seen that, 870. So we seem to be seeing fairly consistent, maybe not exactly, but the numbers are close to what we have been seeing. But we need to find out what happened. We should have seen the summary report and the aggregate report, but we are not seeing it. What I did was I grouped those reports together and slid them up a little bit further, all the way to the top, above the HTTP manager request. And for some reason, everything ran fine. Normally, it would run either way, but for some reason it didn't. So it was just a matter of moving them up to the top, and I reran it and got output. So here's the output. Let's look at the summary report. So we see the output. We see that it didn't run in the normal sequence that we had been seeing, but we have similar information. Sometimes just running multiple times in sequence, this kind of test may produce some response times that we see showing something either the same or very different. and that it can be cause for analyzing and determining that something is going on that's affecting the response times throughout the day or throughout a period of time. Whatever that time is, you're running multiple iterations of tests. Aggregate report, we see the 90 percentile through 99 percentile, and that looks good again for the Google search and others. View results in table, and we see composite results there for Google's search. Anything else I want to point out to you? So, you've seen where we ran a single thread group, and this is where we're running multiple thread groups. And of course, we could do some other combinations, move some of these around in between the two thread groups and cause a different behavior, a different scenario, and different results that we can analyze and then determine if there are some observations we've made, recommendations we need to make, or conclusions that we can draw. Thank you for your time. My time has ended for this session. I thank you for yours. Join me in the next video.